Nowadays, everyone plays MissFortune with a full lethality first strike build, but there is one player who is different. Instead of trying to maximize MissFortune's ult damage, which by the way makes for a very one-dimensional playstyle that is also easy to counter, this player, whose name I couldn't be bothered to pronounce, goes for a much more interesting strategy. Instead of blindly following the meta, this MissFortune has Essence Reaver in her core build, but also the keystone Press the Attack. And the results speak for themselves. A massive win rate of 77% in high elo, reaching rank 1 on the MissFortune leaderboards. Ever since Essence Reaver's bonus AD ratio got nerfed, I personally dismissed the item immediately when crafting new MissFortune builds. MissFortune's base AD is very low, so I thought it wouldn't be worth it. But apparently I was wrong. In any case, the new playstyle is not only good, but also a lot of fun, so let me show you exactly how the rank 1 MissFortune player does it. The rune page used in every single game is Press the Attack, Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline and Coup de Grace with Absolute Focus and Gathering Storms secondary. Now it's been a while, but Press the Attack has, historically speaking, always been a solid choice for MissFortune. It's only that First Strike was the latest trend and it kind of, I don't know, people kind of forgot about Press the Attack, but the item synergizes with MissFortune's trading pattern perfectly. You know, MissFortune's damage is front-loaded and Press the Attack adds even more burst on top of that. MissFortune can strike 3 times very quickly with her innate combo, Auto Q Auto, or in some situations Auto Auto Q, or what have you, but the gist of it, she can trigger Press the Attack very reliably on her primary target. This makes for a lot of burst damage which can catch enemies off guard who are not expecting it, as you're about to see. Now in the next row, the rank 1 player picks Presence of Mind, and I get it, MissFortune is kind of spell reliant, especially when you want to spam Q a lot in teamfights or even in smaller skirmishes or in lane, but since Essence Reaver is part of your core build, you can definitely also get away with other runes here, with both Triumph or Overheal. However, Presence of Mind still puts in a lot of work before you finish Essence Reaver, and even afterwards, Essence Reaver does not keep you topped off at all times. You need to actually land auto attacks, so when you use E a lot or when you use more spells than you can trigger Essence Reaver, you can still go and Presence of Mind prevents that. But this is definitely down to personal preference. Legend Bloodline in the next row is also, well, not a no-brainer because Alacrity has its merits as well, but Legend Bloodline frees up your item slots. This MissFortune build finds itself in auto-attack range a lot more often than other builds, as you probably can already tell from the rune page, so the extra lifesteal really adds up in the late game. Keep in mind, MissFortune applies lifesteal not only with her basic attacks, but also with her Q and her passive. Both of these effects fully apply lifesteal, which makes this stat very valuable on the champion. Coup de Grace is more or less a standard choice in the next slot on the precision path for pretty much any champion, since the rune is just so reliable in most games. But against tanky team compositions, I could also see Cut Down do some work here. However, you can't go wrong with Coup de Grace, especially on a burst-heavy champion like MissFortune. Now, MissFortune has one of the best AD ratios in the entire game. Yes, her base AD is low, but her bonus AD scaling is extremely high. Therefore, Absolute Focus and Gathering Storm are natural choices. Now, the general core items the rank 1 player uses every single game are Doran's Blade for the early game, then Yomu's Ghostblade, then Essence Reaver, then Collector, and somewhere along the way he also picks up tier 1 boots. And in most games they stay tier 1 boots. There are niche scenarios where you might want to have Berserker's Greaves or even defensive boots, but MissFortune generally speaking doesn't need the added movement speed due to her W, and she doesn't excel in longer fights anyway. She wants to go in and out, deal her burst damage, so tier 1 boots are pretty much the best bang for your buck. But as you can see, this core build is still very heavily burst oriented. Ghostblade, Essence Reaver and Collector all effectively buff the damage from your ultimate. I mean, Essence Reaver is kind of weak on ultimate but still has 40 AD plus the crit, but especially your auto Q auto combo really hurts. All that lethality plus the Spellblade effect that triggers on your Q, the enemy will go down very quickly when they don't respect that combo. Now the only awkward part about Essence Reaver is the build path, because, well, all the components, let's be real, kind of suck on MissFortune. Again, her base AD is low, which means Sheen has inherently lower value than on other champions. Well, Warhammer is okay, but it's only 25 AD, and the crit cloak is iffy in the early game at best. However, the completed item is still very strong, as you will see during the analysis part. But due to those weak component items, you also typically don't rush Essence Reaver. As you can see, Ghostblade is preferred as your first item. However, there are situations in which Essence Reaver first can be viable, especially when you're kind of behind in lane and you you can't really expect to be proactive there, so the power trough from Essence Reaver components is not really as impactful, might as well get them then. So after these core items, the build continues with either Lord Dominic's Regards or Mortar Reminder, depending on how important healing reduction is in your current game, then Bloodthirster, and then sell your tier 1 boots for Rapid Fire Cannon. The last Whisper item is mandatory in any game, because in the late game even champions who don't buy armor have a lot of base armor, and it's of course even more important when you have lethality, because you need to keep the enemy armor as low as possible to deal maximum damage. Also, this build does end up with 100% crit in the late game, which is kind of nice, because a lot of the time, well, your ultimate is still valuable, but a lot of the time you will go into auto attack range and gun people down with autos and with Qs, and with these items that works very well. Okay, so far so good. Time to show you what the rank 1 MissFortune player looks like. MissFortune is what I would call a very honest champion. She doesn't have any unfair tools or a million dashes like these more modern AD carries. You can truly see her not outdated kit, but her simplicity in her kit from her release date. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because what MissFortune lacks in terms of mobility, she does make up for in terms of burst damage. If you can land these Q bounces, you will win lane by default essentially. In fact, MissFortune wins most of her lane matchups on paper, but Ezreal is kind of a tough one, because he can farm from range with his own Q spell, avoiding your Q bounce, which is your main pressure tool in lane, so if they can outplay that, then you will have a kind of hard time. However, this doesn't mean you're completely helpless if they try to play passive, because if you can just farm it up, you'll still be golden on MissFortune. And once they do go in, you of course have your burst damage, and in this case the rank 1 player also pressed the attack. So this creates interesting dynamics. Ezreal can farm safely, but he will be on the back foot if he tries to go too aggressive. At least in theory. Because, spoiler alert, I've chosen to show you a game in which things don't necessarily go as planned for the rank 1 player, but this is where he can show his skill the most. The problem here is, of course, that MissFortune is not designed to excel in longer duels. Even with Press the Attack, which is definitely better over longer fights than First Strike or Dark Harvest, for example, her damage is still very much front-loaded, and once you have well, cast all your spells, you're essentially out of fuel. As you can see, she can finish off the Maokai after that if he Braum engage, but Ezreal killed MissFortune's support with way more HP left, plus he stacked his Conqueror, plus he stacked his attack speed steroid passive. So MissFortune can't really win at this point. It's quite close, honestly, but Ezreal does start this lane with 2 extra kills. As a result of this rather iffy play, MissFortune decided to switch gears in the lane phase. Instead of trying to pressure Ezreal with huge burst damage from Serrated Dirk, she actually decides to just buy Sheen plus Longsword, going Essence Reaver first, just so she has that power spike earlier, not needing to go through the awkward components of Essence Reaver later on. Just get that out of the way during the lane phase, so she doesn't need to worry about it later. The lane is very likely not winnable anymore anyway against a high elo opponent, so might as well. But just because Essence Reaver components aren't optimal for MissFortune in the early game, doesn't mean she would be completely helpless. I mean, yes, she is behind in this lane, but her burst damage is still phenomenal, especially with Press the Attack. Yes, with Serrated Dirk instead of Sheen plus Longswords, this would have killed Maokai, which is a little bit frustrating in hindsight, but the hidden advantage you have when you play a build that's not exactly meta is that enemies sometimes fail to play against it correctly. With First Strike MissFortune, this would be a free attempt for a kill for Rek'Sai, but Press the Attack is so strong, you just auto-Q auto, MissFortune triggers it so easily, and Rek'Sai will fall to that burst damage as you see. She turns around here thinking she is safe, but once she flashes in and that third auto hits, especially with that Sheen trigger on top, she didn't see the damage coming, therefore feeding that shutdown away. Yet, as I've promised, this game is a difficult one. We just cut to this scene just to show you that Rek'Sai is still or again sitting bot lane. She's not giving MissFortune a break. Anyway, the rank 1 player responds wisely by staying under tower defensively as long as he needs to, However, he switches gears once his jungler shows up. Again, Rek'Sai is still sitting bot lane, but MissFortune can clutch it out with a Shaco box. This is definitely a lucky play. But at the same time, Shaco ends up feeding yet another kill to the enemy bot lane, so MissFortune still needs to be extremely careful of this hyper-fed Ezreal. And mind you, in addition to bot lane being in shambles, the rest of the map falls as well. For some reason, mid lane takes a double herald charge, losing both towers eventually. And it's not just bot lane camped, mid lane falling, but top lane lost their tower as well and is in deep trouble. Your average solo queue AD carry would definitely throw in the towel here, spamming surrender, but not the rank 1 MissFortune. Remember when I said Ezreal can stay relatively safe against MissFortune, especially against her all-in combo? Well, there's one mistake Ezreal can make which you can punish hard. Please have a look. Ezreal can always jump out of MissFortune's ultimate if he needs to, but once he uses that jump for other defensive maneuvers, or even for offense, sometimes Ezreals just jump in mindlessly, his only line of defense is essentially gone. Even the Braum stun here, it is icing on the cake for sure, also Orianna damage, but it wasn't necessary. An Ezreal without E is a sitting duck and will eat your entire ultimate. But small victories like these can only take you so far, of course. There's still a long way to go, and Red Team is making more and more progress on the map. But here's the thing, even with Baron buff, it is actually very difficult for the enemy to siege MissFortune. She always has that threat of her ultimate looming in the background, so you can just keep the waves pushed. If the enemy tries to push themselves and get your minions or get their minions under your tower, they risk getting reverse all into by MissFortune. As long as you have your ultimate, you can always keep that threat alive. Yet the distinct advantage you have with Essence Reaver press the attack MissFortune over something like full lethality first strike is that your ultimate is not your only pressure tool during teamfights. Please have a look. Yeah, mistakes indeed happen, and even a skilled MissFortune player can pull the trigger too early, almost completely wasting the ultimate here. I mean, it's still a zoning tool in this case, preventing the enemy from engaging further, but that's still a wasted ultimate for sure. However, does this really matter if your primary target just dies in a couple of hits? Look at that insane burst damage with Essence Reaver press the attack and the other lethality items, or armor penetration items in general. This Ezreal just drops dead from auto Q auto into minor follow-up. The almost over-reliance on ultimates from first strike lethality MissFortune is a real big weakness that this build, the Essence Reaver press the attack version, beautifully solves. I mean, in a situation like this, especially in the Yasuo matchup in general, Wind Wall just completely nullifies your champion, but when your Qs and auto attacks hold so much value, you can even duke it out with a 2 levels higher Yasuo who dashes in melee range because, well, he needs melee range to hit you, but you can't hit him from range due to Wind Wall. And normally a MissFortune would be helpless here, but this build just auto Q auto, yes, Orianna helped for sure, but you know what I mean, you have been in a situation like this before, I assume. And this safety net of auto Q auto combos, which can still carry teamfights, should affect your playmaking as a whole. The rank 1 player treats this ultimate entirely differently. Most MissFortune players are very greedy with their ultimate, holding onto it until the last second so they don't accidentally waste it. But, I mean, they kinda have to, since it is their main damage source in a teamfight. Yet with this playstyle your ult still deals crazy damage, but even if you quote-unquote waste it because the rest of the team could still disengage and you only hit one single target, it doesn't matter. You're not a sitting duck without your ultimate, you still have your auto Q auto combo. And the later the game goes, the more potent this combo gets. Most AD carries would never even dare to get into melee range against Yasuo and Rek'Sai, but this MissFortune, she just bursts them down before they can touch her. And just like that, threatening huge burst damage like this, the rank 1 MissFortune does bring his team back into the game. Finally, they are the ones making progress on the map, taking the objectives and pressuring the enemy. And while Red Team are still able to take down the dragon in return, those teamfights are getting more and more brutal. Please pay special attention to how MissFortune uses ultimate in this one. As you saw, she almost ults away from the fight, into this choke point here. I mean, she only hits Rek'Sai with this, but this baits out Yasuo's Wind Wall, who will always save the spell to block your ultimate entirely, so aiming for the bulk of the teamfight doesn't really make sense in the first place. But I mean, even after they go in, first of all, ultimate still scatters the enemy team, and after Yasuo goes in, he still falls to MissFortune's peel, well, the peel from her teammates, and to MissFortune's burst damage. I had not been a fan of Essence Reaver on MissFortune before because of her low base AD, which means low value from the item, but I mean, results speak for themselves. The build fixes a lot of the problems I also had with the meta build of First Strike Lethality, and I recommend you just give it a go. And for more educational AD carry content, click the link on your screen right there.